basically, he says the unidentified flying objects just essentially disappeared off of radar. They're like one beep, gone. And which meant they went from like 50 to 100 feet off the ground to about 80,000 feet straight up in like less than 2 seconds.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is a conversation with my good friend, Dave Robinson, and this conversation was actually released a couple years ago on the Aux when I used to have conversations on there. That's my other podcast that has slowly morphed into a solo, wild comedy-style podcast. But this conversation, for whatever reason, was released on there, and I don't think it got enough attention. It's a really good conversation. It's about a UFO experience, and there's more and more coming out about UFOs and UAPs and the people who are reliable, like Dave is, and who experience these types of phenomena. So that is why I'm releasing it on the AUXORO Podcast. I hope you guys enjoy it, and thank you to Dave Robinson for sharing this experience. We are in space. We have just launched the podcast. We are blasting off on this episode, which is very topic appropriate because we are diving into aliens today and general discussions about alien topics, UFO, and we're even going to get into some personal experience. And I am sitting here with my good friend and also CEO of workyourstories.com, Dave Robinson, also holistic health coach. What's going on?
Boom. What's happening, y'all? Happy to be here. Excited to chat all things aliens, extraterrestrial, unknown phenomenon, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a fun topic to dive in on.
Yeah, if you haven't already taken your mind-altering substance as a listener or a watcher, it would be a good time to pop that in now and just sit along for the ride.
Hit pause.
Well, yeah.
Hit play in 45 minutes to an hour, and we're back. You haven't missed anything.
Yes. We're back. We're doing some weird things on the screen right now. Maybe we sound a little weird in your headphones, but you know, it's enhancing the experience. So I thought a good place to start would be alien and UFO perspective at a general level. And we're going to get into your specific experience with a possible UFO encounter. But before that, I think it would be good to start with how is your view of aliens and UFOs and that whole talk around the subject? How had that evolved throughout your life before your experience that we're going to get into? So before that even happened, what was going on in your mind about this sort of topic? What were you thinking? What were you listening to? Like, were you kind of part of that conspiratorial community, keeping up with those sort of things? Where were you at headspace wise?
So my grandfather and my dad have a running bet going that my dad bet $100 that he does not think that there will be extraterrestrials in my grandfather's lifetime. Like, confirmed. And my grandfather believes and bet $100 that there will be extraterrestrials in his lifetime. Confirmed. Now, he's 85 on Monday, right? So about a week from 5 days from now or whatever. And growing up, I had that conversation, that bet in my, in the story bank of the family, because my grandfather has had a couple of encounters in his life, right? And so, I think all of us at some point grew up watching Ancient Aliens on the History Channel or some shit, right? So there's some, semblance of whatever, but it had actually been a couple stories within my family, even prior to me seeing, and experiencing what I experienced. So the idea that there could be something was out there. I also took an astronomy course.
I'm a Scorpio, by the way.
Yeah, double Aquarius here.
Yeah.
Moon and sun, baby. So,
yep.
But I took an astronomy course in high school, and then in college, I took another one because I found it really interesting. And though it was much less about looking at cool pictures of space, which is what I thought it was going to be, and much more math, right? The vastness of space and the size of it, and the amount of stars and suns and solar systems and all that shit. I mean, it just mathematically, the possibilities of there being something else that's our definition of living out there, those probabilities are very high statistically. And so just given the sheer number of it, right? And so knowing those two things, I had come to my conclusion of there is most likely some form of alien life out there prior to, or I guess while growing up. So
yeah, is there something you remember vividly about the experiences that your grandfather had? It's something that stands out when you remember those stories?
So he had two experiences. One, he was 18. He grew up in rural West Virginia in a town called Franklin, West Virginia, kind of a mountain town. And he and a couple friends were out back on his back porch, which was kind of on the side of a mountain. And they had a silent helicopter, basically like a floating, really bright white light come up kind of down to the city and then up towards them. And they had a shined a light, like a spotlight in and around them, and then disappeared. And he said it was probably 50 feet off the trees, never made a sound. He thought that was super strange, of course, and, et cetera. Swears he wasn't drinking, whole 9 yards, right?
Yeah. Not on any other substances?
No, not on any other substances. Yeah, exactly. The second one is much more quote unquote real and much more in line with a lot of what we've been seeing. So my grandfather served in the U.S. Navy on the USS Enterprise, which was the first nuclear carrier that the United States Navy commissioned. And this was in Vietnam. It was in the late 60s. And he was in the communications bridge because he was involved in running the radar, right? And like viewing the radar and giving communications to, from their department to the bridge, like to the admiral and the captain, et cetera, right? And so they had an incident in the South Pacific, I think they were in, where they had lights kind of show up on screen, and at the same time a corroborating radar popped up, right? And the lights they could see with their eyes, kind of shadowing the carrier group for an hour, 30 minutes or whatever. And, so they have this stuff that they can't really identify on radar. And so my grandfather was in what I believe is called a C-130. It's a plane that has like the big kind of radar on the top. And so he was in that plane, and they launched from the aircraft carrier to get in the air to set up a radar in the air so that the fighter jets could scramble and then go and check out what the hell this thing was, right? And so, from my grandfather's perspective, he's looking at the radar, he's in the air, he can see the lights off in the distance, he can see them show up on the radar screen, he sees the carrier on the radar, he sees our planes take off and kind of like bank around, and he's listening to the comms in the headset, and basically he says the unidentified flying objects just essentially disappeared off of radar. They're like one beep, gone. And which meant they went from like 50 to 100 feet off the ground to about 80,000 feet straight up in like less than 2 seconds.
So similar to
very
things like what David Fravor has said on Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman podcast, where he's a Air Force Navy pilot, and he describes the craft that he saw, whatever it was, basically accelerate at a rate which there's no technology that we know of on the planet. It's basically a blip and then gone. You can't even see it.
Yeah, I mean, if pilots now are operating at 3, 4, 5, 8 Gs, this is like 200 Gs type stuff, right? And this was, I've been hearing this story since I was 8 or 10, But I think the other really interesting thing is we see a lot of these convergences around nuclear. They call them incursions, right? They see them around nuclear sites. And so basically what happened afterwards is my grandfather said that they came back, they got debriefed just like normal. And they had, like a conversation of, okay, like we keep this within, these walls or whatever. Right. And, and then it's 60 years later, 50 years later, here we are talking about it. But
so this was about 1960s, around that time?
Late 60s. Yeah, like
late
60s. Yeah, somewhere around there.
And he, was it a co-pilot situation where he was with someone else, or was he the only guy flying the plane?
No, he wasn't flying. He was in the plane looking at the radar.
In the plane looking at the radar, okay.
Yeah, in the plane that was in the air first to kind of set the scene for the, or scope the scene for the ensuing party.
So you had an up close and personal account from someone in your family, your grandfather, that is in line with a lot of the conversations that are becoming more mainstream today because of people like Joe Rogan or Lex Fridman that are willing to go on record and have thoughtful, informative, and honest conversations with pilots or people that have had UFO experiences. And I think it's fascinating that you had this story decades before it was being made public on platforms to millions of people. Like you saw this, or you heard about it when you were 8, 10 years old. And then it must be like, how do you feel seeing similar stories come out now where there are definitely a lot of similar details between what you're describing and what people are coming out and saying now on podcasts?
I mean, it's really rad, specifically coming from, my granddad, who is a hero of mine and who I consider a major influence in my life. And, he's a very gregarious guy. He's a great storyteller. He tells good stories, and with any story, there's often a degree of some flair, let's call it.
Oh yeah.
Right?
You got to sell it. You got to give the people something.
No doubt. And, I for one had never really consciously had any doubt that he saw what he saw. And especially once I saw what I saw, and, we can certainly get into that, but, now having those stories be so similar, it's just another layer to the, oh, well, wow, there is very likely some stuff that we just really don't know a whole lot about happening right around us. So it's cool to see the similarities for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to give listeners a little bit of background on my UFO or UFO type experiences that would fall into that category, and to which the answer is literally none. I haven't had an experience that I'm conscious of, and I haven't had anyone in my personal life, anyone close to me, that has described an experience like what your grandfather was describing. So I'm coming from someone who's interested as a third-party observer, as a podcast listener, that had a very caricatured idea of alien life and UFOs as a teenager, as most teenagers do, and all through college. And then the first
Space Jams, right?
Space Jams, yeah, exactly. I was like, damn, I hope some aliens come down to Earth so I can challenge them to a pickup game and fucking
some sweet new Looney Tunes,
dunk on them. Yeah, winner takes the galaxy. Exactly. But yeah, I had this very caricatured version, and then within the past 4 or 5 years, I started paying attention to people like Bob Lazar because of Joe Rogan, who repeatedly mentioned him, and then eventually had him on the podcast because of the documentary, I believe it was with Jeremy Corbell, about his whole experience working on what was possibly a UFO aircraft. I heard David Fravor come on Joe Rogan and Lex Fridman and listen to both of those conversations multiple times. And the way in which they talk about these experiences, guys like David Fravor and guys like Bob Lazar, they seem super level-headed, super calm. They don't see, I don't know them, but they don't seem like they're after attention. They have had to been asked, many times to come on podcasts and talk about this. They talk about it like any normal experience. Like they were driving a car down the street to a grocery store and they saw something on the sidewalk, and they describe it with like a pedestrian quality that they're not like, it doesn't seem like they're trying to fit some sort of cinematic idea of what an alien or UFO encounter would be like. They talk about it with such, level-headedness. And to me, the combination of the personalities of people talking about these encounters and the way in which they described it, because there are a lot of sensationalist encounters that are just not true. That's why it's so hard to decipher what to listen to and what to not listen to, because if you can get, people love attention, and if you can get attention by claiming something, whether it's, you know, UFOs or money or whatever field it is, if you can get attention, just the nature of that field will corral people to that area who are attention seekers, and they'll fucking make up shit or sensationalize shit just to have a story written about them or have a documentary or something like that. And I did not get that feeling when I listened to David Fravor or Bob Lazar, guys that have a lot of technical experience. One's a Navy pilot. The other one was working on technology and cars. Yeah, little rocket scientist. Rocket scientists. And that is my background of UFO experiences. Nothing personal, no one in my family, but people coming forward that seem sane and thoughtful and willing to be proven wrong. That's the thing. Both of those guys are like, if there's something that is proposed that makes more sense and there's evidence for it, I'm willing to consider that this is not of another world. But right now we don't have a better explanation. So I would encourage people to, you know, go check those episodes out. I'm gonna link all the sources and things in the podcast notes. But for me, that is my background, and I thought it would be good to have where both of us are coming from before we get into Dave's UFO experience.
Yeah. No, I'm happy you shared that, and it's interesting too with, you know, the caricatured version of what so many of us tend to think about when it comes to UFOs, or maybe even thinking like predator versus alien, or, you know, there's just a myriad number of things, and frankly, like, the reality is it could be literally anything.
Yeah.
Under the sun and not under the sun, right? When we say the phrase under the sun, that's in our little deal here, right? It could be not from under our sun. So who knows what it could be, you know? So I just think it's really interesting to keep that in mind.
Yeah, we're in one little spot and one little slice of our own galaxy within the solar system, within the universe. Like, it's fucking insane how big things are. I thought before we get into the actual experience, I wanted to do some sort of a jumping off point with a piece of content that has entered the mainstream that may give some context for what may have possibly happened with the experience that you described. We'll see. It may have something to do with it. It may not. But there was a article in Scientific American called "Maybe the Aliens Are Really Here," and this was published June 21st. So 2 days ago?
Yeah.
And the article talks about the likelihood of extraterrestrial intelligence having visited Earth, and if it has visited, what forms it may have taken. So I wanted to read a couple excerpts and kind of get into this before we get into your personal experience. So this is from Scientific American, "Maybe the Aliens Really Are Here," June 21st, 2021. It says, large numbers of extraterrestrial civilizations might contribute to a nodal system. The store of information would only grow with time, regardless of whether the contributing civilizations persist or have gone extinct. So they're talking about like a nodal system that civilizations could set up that would act as kind of these hubs of information where you could collect information for a certain area of the universe or a certain area of the galaxy. They say we might contribute Aristotle, Shakespeare, Beethoven, Monet to this Encyclopedia Galactica. However, we will not be in a position to barter our culture, having surveilled our TV and internet for at least 70 years. Extraterrestrials have probably uploaded all that they want from us. Nonetheless, extraterrestrials may wish to recruit us into the galactic clubs that we might manufacture probes and nodes and otherwise take responsibility for the maintenance of the interstellar communication system within our immediate stellar neighborhood. That would be our bargaining chip. So a lot of this article goes into alien technology without biological bodies. So basically just probes from alien civilizations that And when you just have a probe, you can withstand things like an extreme amount of G-force because there's no biological body in the probe. So things that are coming down to Earth, visiting Earth, and then basically carrying off information and dropping it in a node. This article goes into a lot of detail on that. And then the last excerpt I have to jump off of that is they say, nevertheless, many scientists now agree, SETI scientists, which is search for extraterrestrial intelligence, many SETI scientists now agree with UFOers that the first alien detection plausibly could occur within our own solar system. Both UFOers and SETI scientists should also agree that if some UFO sightings are genuine sightings of aliens, then they must be of robotic probes rather than vessels crewed by biological beings. If nothing less, such beings would be crushed by the G-forces of their purported very large accelerations. And so, again, they go into, if aliens were to visit us, based on what we know about how information is gathered on Earth, most likely it would be probes, alien technology coming down in probes without biological bodies, so without, like our version of a person inside. And then that would allow them to basically do all the maneuvers they want, become undetected, not have to worry about anyone surviving, kind of like what we do when we send probes to Mars and shit. And then that piece of alien tech then like goes back to the node, drops off the information, and then that could just be like a point so the aliens don't have to go back all the way to Earth to gather information. It's just like they're basically dropping a bunch of nodes all over space, and it's like these upload points you can plug in and be like, let me learn about humans and shit like that. So it's a really fascinating article, and I wanted to get your view on those quotes before we jump into those before we jump into your experience.
I could totally buy it, man. And, the technology conversation is a really interesting one, especially when we think about how much technology has accelerated over time, where we started flying 130 years ago or less than 130 years ago. The computers have been around for 70. Supercomputers have been in our pockets for 10 or 5 years or something, right? So an alien technology of any kind that's 100 years ahead of us, or 1,000 years ahead of us, or 10,000 or 1,000,000 years ahead of us, which are still blips in the radar of the scope of time that the universe has been around, So I think any advancement then has to be considered, potential alien type technology, right?
Yeah.
The other really interesting thing to think about is look back, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, where we have across so many various ancient religions, cultures, civilizations, we have what appear to be very mystical events, right? Humanoid-like figures coming down. Jesus ascended into heaven, right? Visits by angels and spirits, and the Sanskrit talks about metal butterflies, or flying in the sky, and metal birds, right? Like there's just so many various things where if someone with such advanced technology comes down or comes and shows up, like that's going to be perceived as supernatural. Similar to when Cortez and the conquistadors came to the Americas from Spain, and they were the white gods, right? That sailed in on massive, clouds in the ocean and shot lightning from their fucking sticks, right? And like they're aliens, all right? They're gods. I think potentially many of our religions could be based off of visits from potential extraterrestrials, biological extraterrestrials, X number of years ago, right? Thousands of years ago, right? I do also believe that they could possibly send probes or drones or nodes and be just collecting info, collecting, data, getting soil samples, and holy shit, what's this air made out of? And this is air, like doing the whole 9 yards, being scientists,
Yeah.
I think that's a totally plausible explanation as well.
It's a crazy coincidence because just like Cortez, your nickname in the soccer community is the White God of Lightning, El Dio Blanco. So you definitely know what you're talking about when it comes to godlike capabilities.
I'll take that, man. If only I had if I was named Davino or Dave or something like that, I'd be an even better soccer player.
Yeah. But I do think this article is fascinating because I'm seeing not that, another life form is going to be in tune with what it's like to be a human or have human-like qualities or human nature. I can see, though, and we already do this on our own planet, if we're going to do something, we create technology so that we don't have to be there to actually do it. It's like the lazy way to go, explore an area is invent a drone and have it go fly over. And if something happens to you, like you lose a drone, but you don't lose a life. And it's like, all right, if we want to go explore the galaxy and we want to be able to be undetected and maneuver without having to worry about people inside, the human lazy way to do that would be like make this, to us, like this godlike version of a drone that can store data and then just operate that from wherever the fuck you are.
Yeah, but I mean, think fast forward 100 years, and that's not out of the question of being in the realm of capabilities. I mean, now we've got little like dragonfly-sized drones that can fly 100 miles an hour with fucking 5K and 5G, everything on it. So I mean, there's just technology is advancing at such an incremental rate that I don't even necessarily see that as being out of the question of, in 20 years or let alone 200 or 2000.
So last summer you were in New York, correct? Like about
Correct.
A year ago.
Yeah.
And I was with another group of friends, and we were all staying in my apartment, and you started to tell and eventually told the entire story of a UFO experience that you had. And I was fascinated the entire time. This is also, around the time I had started to listen to conversations that were coming out in the podcast hemisphere. And so let's start from the beginning. What happened leading up to that day? What were you doing? What was your job? Where were you at in life? And set the tone for that day and that experience before we jump into the details of that day.
Yeah. So this is early January or mid-January 2012. And so I'm a couple years out of college. I am very new into my financial planning career. Maybe been in the career a year, been at this firm maybe 6 months. And myself and another young guy, a couple years older than me, guy by the name of Dan, kind of no nonsense, no bullshit New Yorker, right? Y'all would really get along, frankly. Sounds
like it.
Yeah, hell yeah. But he and I found in our firm there was a bunch of accounts from an old office that had closed down, 10, 15 years ago down in Southwest Virginia, maybe 3.5, 4 hours away. So there's a cluster of accounts, and nobody was really servicing these accounts, and they were all spread out. They were old insurance policies. And Dan and I went to our manager and asked if we could get the accounts, and we'll give him 10%, but no more. And we want to go and have these accounts and, yada, yada. And he said, sure, go. Right. So I found myself driving down to Southwest Virginia, in and through the Appalachian Mountains, once or twice or 3 or 4 times a month. And so we'd visit with people. We try to, see what kind of policies they had, did anything change, et cetera, et cetera. And so I found myself in the car a lot, and we found ourselves in, remote-ish places on a relatively regular basis. So I was on one of those trips, one of those financial planning trips, when said incident occurred.
And when you were on your way down to this office in Southern Virginia, driving through the mountains of Southern Virginia, what was the first cue to you that something was not normal? Like, regardless what the experience was, this was a cue or something you were picking up that you're like, this is not something that is a normal experience.
Yeah, so we'd had a pretty normal day, and we had left, we're maybe 30 minutes into our 3.5, 4 hour drive home, and we were not taking the highway. So we were instead taking like real back roads, right? My phone was already dead, right? I'd been on it texting the whole day probably. So I was, my phone was dead. Dan was driving, and it's wintertime. It's around 8 p.m. So it's dark. And the first thing that really set off as like weird was we both commented that we hadn't seen anybody on the road in a while, and that it was super dark, and wow. And then Dan said, dude, my phone just lost all its juice. I'm going to turn it off in case we need it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan turned his phone off because it lost a whole bunch of juice.
So it was at a good amount of juice, and then the juice just dropped precipitously.
We're at 3 bars. Then he's got a blinking red bar worth of juice, and we find that to be strange. And I remember specifically him turning off his phone for low battery, a weird low battery, and he turned off his phone in case we need it.
Got it.
There's a lot of things.
Probably a good idea. It's probably
yeah.
I mean, I not knowing what's going to happen, I'd probably do the same thing. I'd be like, we don't know if we're driving on a fucking mountain road in Virginia. It would probably be a good idea to have some reserve battery in case, something happens, car breaks down, or else we're just fucking sitting out here until someone finds us, or we can walk to the closest town. And so while Dan was driving, he turns his phone off. What was the next thing that happened?
So I'm got my seat leaned back, and I'm just kind of looking out the front windshield, and he's telling a story, and I don't know what his story's about, listening to tunes, and I noticed 2 red lights, like way the fuck up in the sky, right? Like not star distance, but definitely in the plane distance / maybe further. I don't know. Right.
What's the light like at this time? Is it completely dark? Is it kind of like twilight? What is the sky look like? Dark. Okay.
Dark. Very dark. I don't remember there being a moon. It was really dark. 8 p.m. in the middle of winter. So definitely dark. And the 2 red lights were really close together, and they were moving like very erratically, right? Like plane, pretty steady speed and straight. Satellite blinks, you lose it for a little bit. Blinks, you lose it for a little bit, but it's a pretty straight line, right? This was jerky, right? Like very erratic with its movement, right? And over the next couple of minutes, 1, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, I followed with my eyes. These 2 red lights got bigger and closer to the ground, and ultimately to the point where I found myself like looking up under Dan's arms, his one arm that he's driving, and I'm like trying to peer underneath him to see out the driver's side window. Yeah. And he's like, he looks at me, he's like, yo, what the fuck are you looking at? And
yeah. Are the 2 red lights, while they're moving, are they moving around herky jerky together, like they're part of the same thing? Or okay, so it looked like the 2 lights are jerking around in unison, like wherever one light goes, the others go.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not like spreading apart, but if they like zip to bottom left, both lights are zipping to bottom left. If it's turned on its side, both are turning on its side, right? So I'm seeing like one thing, right? One object. And ultimately, I saw that object go from, plane height, plane distance in the fucking sky down to ground level, to the point where I'm seeing red lights through the trees and going, holy shit, Dan, what are these? And I remember Dan saying, what, you're talking about the cell tower over there? And I said, dude, this cell tower was just 30,000 feet in the air 2 minutes ago. And, I remember him going, no fucking way. And then it couldn't have been like 15 seconds later, before we bank left, the road opens up into a big ass field, and here we are.
And so to back up a little bit.
I'm backing up.
Obviously something about these lights caught your eye right away, because it's dark out, you're in the middle of a country road. If you see a plane in the middle of nowhere, you kind of just like, you see the lights and nothing really jumps out at you consciously or subconsciously. And you're like, that's traveling in a straight line. That's a plane. And then that's the end of it. You're not tracking it. You're not looking at it. You're not being like, that plane was here 30 seconds ago and now it's over here. Maybe that's not a plane. So something about it. And it sounds like the speed of which it was moving, the irregularity of the movements jerking around kind of in this erratic behavior, that was what was standing out to you the most?
For sure. And I think that having the knowledge of my grandparent or my granddad going through that, like without having that story in the back of my head and like such a vivid memory or story of mine growing up, I wouldn't have been necessarily even open to fixating my eyes on that for long enough to see something weird happen, you know?
And so it's at a point right now where Dan mistook it for a cell tower. So it went from something that was around the plane height, jerking around, all of a sudden it makes its way down to, I'm imagining what is, you know, almost ground level, but like a little above, and it looks like a cell tower in the distance to Dan out his like driver's side.
His 9 o'clock, like to his direct left out the driver's side window. It looks like a, you know, red lights, cell tower height, a couple 100 feet off the ground, 100 feet off the ground, whatever, through the trees.
And so when Dan says, what are you talking about? That cell tower over there? And then it opens up. You said you bank left and you're driving through a field. What is your position now relative to those two lights, and what starts to happen?
So we bank left. It opens up. That quote unquote cell tower is now directly in front of a road, or like directly over the road, which is a straight road. We're heading directly into this thing. It's maybe 100, 200, 300 feet off the road. And, you know, for a real lack of better terms and this far into the conversation, I could say that I turn a corner and I'm driving straight into a spaceship. Quite fucking literally. Like a massive, massive, massive craft. So as soon as we turn and Dan sees this, Dan immediately goes, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? Right, over and over and over again. And I'm on a oh my god type just loop. And it took 10 seconds to process this thing, right? So quite literally, you know, we turn a corner and dead ass straight the fuck in front of us that we're driving towards is a craft of some type that is not looking in any way, shape, or form like anything that I've ever seen in my eyes from humans, right? Many plane sizes big. This is not like a one little plane. This isn't like a Cessna, you know, little plane, like the little tiny UFOs. This isn't like a Tic Tac UFO. This is like the mothership size, bro. And it's just directly in front of me and we're driving into it.
What sort of shape was it? What was it? Like the prototypical what people think of the saucer? What was it, more of elongated? What shape were you actually seeing from the ship from your angle? Because I assume you're underneath it, kind of like watching it get bigger.
Yes.
Above you.
Yes, and it was a kind of a rectangular shape, but a big rectangle, right? And the red lights, you know, think of like left side, right side, right? That's where the red lights are. Right. I don't remember whether they're top, middle, bottom, or whatever it is, but I remember seeing those red lights on one of the corners of each of these things.
Yeah. So just one light on either side.
Bingo. Excuse me. And then as we're turning the corner and driving into this thing, like if the windshield is the size that I'm, you know, kind of looking at, we're a half mile away or so, and it's like a good 2 feet of size taking up the windshield, like still pretty far away from it. Like it's a big thing. Once I see it with my eyes clearly, I never see it move. I never see it sway. I never see it shift. I never see it go up or down an inch or left to right an inch. It was cemented in the sky.
So it was very still. None of like, if you think of a helicopter moving, even when a helicopter is still, it's still like bouncing from side to side. There was none of that typical kind of like stalling aircraft movement that you would imagine.
Not a millimeter of it. It was cemented in the sky, directly over the road. And, you know, I kind of had this freak out and I'm trying to process. And then the next thing that I notice that kind of pulls me back into the present moment is I feel the car accelerate hard. And Dan had like stopped on the gas. And then he shifted from like, what the fuck is that, to what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Right. And so I wanted to I wanted him to slow down. I told him to slow down, and I wanted to see like if it's making any noise, because I already noticed and can process that it's not moving, and I can notice and process that it's big as fuck and that we're driving like right into it. So I'm like, all right, maybe it's like some like I'm trying to hear an engine basically. And I got Dan to slow down. He slowed down to like 20, 25 miles an hour, to the point where I was able to hang on to the oh shit bar and like sit on the window. So like roll the windows down, sit on the window, hang on to the oh shit bar. So my torso is like outside of the window. And it was a beautiful, clear, crisp, cold winter day. Not a sound, not a murmur was in the air, you know? So it was totally silent, totally still.
So if you closed your eyes, you would, like, a blind person wouldn't have thought anything was up. They would have been like, we're just driving through a country back road.
Yep. It's literally like they forgot to turn cloak mode on.
Yeah.
And
that's what I was imagining. I was like, that sounds like they were just doing some recon, and they were chilling there, and someone on the ship or whoever they're controlling it from is like back home. It's like, oh fuck, like, dude, you accidentally sat on the switch, like, fucking turn that shit back on.
Exactly. Or like somehow like the guy that was supposed to be like guarding the cars like was taking a shit when we were driving through, and like didn't pick up that we were supposed to be there, because it was so blatantly obvious that something is up, and that this is not, like, there was no hint of that we're trying to keep this from you in any way, shape, or form. It was almost like, yo, motherfuckers, we're here now.
Yeah. Some guy got a talking to at the Alien Explorer HR, HQ. Some guy was like, yo, dude, you gotta leave stealth mode on when we got those small things running around Earth in the area. I don't know what they are, but we'll figure it out.
Seriously.
You said you were positioning yourself out the window trying to hear something. So you're driving towards it still. You said Dan started to accelerate. You got both the windows down, I assume, just like trying to hear anything.
Yep.
What's the next new piece of information? Just like anything, it starts to get bigger as expected. You're driving closer, so it's going to start looking bigger. You're driving under the lights are getting brighter. What's kind of the next thing that you feel or see as you start to approach and accelerate this craft or thing?
I don't think I lost time or anything like that, but I really do feel like time slowed down, because once I realized that there was no sound coming out of it, then there was no more like instant logical explanations for what I saw, and thus was able to really settle in pretty immediately into holy fuck. And that's literally what I said as I drove underneath this thing. Like, you know, I realized, oh my God, it's not making any sound. In the next 10 seconds of us driving towards it, and as it gets bigger and bigger, it's just me just going, oh my God, as I passed underneath it. And if a rock was dropped from the dead ass center of that alien or whatever that thing was, it would have hit us in the dead ass center of the windshield. And, you know, it did light up a little bit underneath. I remember very vividly, but unclearly seeing, like, the memory is vivid, but I remember the image being unclear of the bottom of this thing. And it was pretty dark, but I got a little bit of the light from the red light on this side, and what I found out to be like a white light, a small white light on the other side. But it was no lights underneath. There were no doors underneath. I couldn't see any portals. There was nothing like that. It just looked textured. It looked like almost as if you were seeing a mountain range from, 20,000 feet, just like textured,
Okay, so almost like the surface of the moon or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What I might consider, or what people might consider, like an anti-radar type looking thing, right?
Okay.
Or like anti-radar texture or whatever.
What color was it besides the red lights? Were you able to tell what color the actual material was?
Dark, black. Yeah. Once we drove underneath it, I kind of like turned, shifted my body, and looked at it as it kept getting smaller and smaller. And over the next 30 seconds, it just slowly disappeared from my line of sight. And, I sunk back into my chair, and Dan was kind of hunched over the driving wheel. And I remember like seeing him like knead the driving wheel and like the handle. And we didn't talk for about 10 minutes. And then he broke the silence with...
So you guys were sitting there silently
just
for 10
silent
minutes.
for at least 10 minutes.
Taking it in.
And like I was kind of slumped back. He was kind of hunched over. And he takes a big breath. I remember him going, well, that changes everything. And dude, straight out of a movie. It was fucking perfect. And I laughed my ass off, and we were like, what the fuck was that? And started to like freak out. Going back to that, being there, I never felt threatened. I never felt, I wasn't scared. I was shocked. Right. And I think there's a big difference between those two things for me. Is like, it was astounding versus like frightening. And, again, I like going right underneath it. I don't know whether we lost time. I don't have any memories of anything. I haven't had any weird dreams or flashbacks or operating tables. I haven't found anything in my ass. I've looked, right? I haven't found
anything in your ass from the aliens.
From the aliens, right? Exactly.
You haven't found anything that you didn't put there.
Yeah. But I think the biggest thing was like, it was so vivid and it was so real, and it wasn't anything that could be explained away, and it wasn't anything that this was about as sure of a thing as I could experience. And I got to experience with someone who I was close with and still am pretty close with. And so, thank God I wasn't solo dolo for this thing. That would have driven me fucking mad,
100%.
dude. But, I didn't feel like they were bad, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So you didn't. There have been times in my life where I'm around a person or I'm in a situation in an area, maybe around a group of people where nothing bad is happening, but I just feel a darker energy from certain people. And maybe it's right, maybe it's not right, but that sort of energy transmission has caused me to leave some places for no apparent reason at all. I'm just like, something's telling me to leave right now. You didn't get any of that vibe from that experience. You weren't getting like your spidey senses of like obviously you're being overwhelmed with other sensations like light and oh my fucking God, what is going on right now? The whole build up with the jerky movements, but you didn't get any sort of dark energy or like something is super wrong, like something bad is about to happen.
No, and I don't know why we didn't stop, and I don't know why we kept going and driving right underneath it. I don't know why a lot of those things occurred or a lot of those things didn't occur. I just know that we experienced what we experienced, and there at the time it didn't seem like it was going to be a bad. Or I didn't ever feel in danger. Now afterwards, I did have a thought and kind of got some heebie-jeebies for a while over like, oh man, I'm going to be like visited by the Men in Black or like visited by like, the aliens themselves that night or soon thereafter. And they're going to be like, don't fucking tell anybody about this, memory gone, or like, I don't know. Like, I guess the pop culture did influence me and have me think a certain way about what potentially could occur or whatever it may be. But in the moment, I didn't feel anything other than just like an existential awe.
So I know one of the first things I would have done in the immediate aftermath, so within 24 or 48 hours, besides just like unpacking that experience personally or spiritually, the first practical thing that I would have done is looking up any stories in the area or maybe any, are there military bases close by? Is there anything that could even remotely explain what happened? Did you and Dan go on that rabbit hole dive of let's try to find any articles somewhere in 100 miles, or is there a military base around? Did you guys find anything in the following days or weeks after that experience?
Yeah. So, you nailed it. I went looking. 3 days earlier in a town called Stanton, Virginia, or outside of Stanton. We were down near Roanoke, and they're on the same like road, Interstate 81, but they're maybe like an hour and a half away. But a lady reported seeing like 2 red lights and like a dark craft, right, a couple days earlier in and around that area. So I thought that was really, really, really interesting. The way that I described it, I've had a couple people say, well, it could have been like a weather balloon, and it wasn't a fucking weather balloon. You know, like,
yeah.
And I've looked up pictures of those things, and there's a very stark and clear difference as far as in many ways.
And going from plane height to looking like a cell tower, I can't imagine a balloon maneuvering, you know, anything close to that. That seems like almost like I wouldn't even consider the fact that it was a balloon if I were you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't a balloon, right? It definitely wasn't a balloon. You know, there are bases in and around there, but it goes back to the Bob Lazar conversation of like, there are just technologies that don't exist. Like I was really working through that in my mind at the time of, you know, because I felt like that's what my granddad would have done, you know, and he would have asked, you know, well, did it make any noise? Did you see it rock back and forth? You know, how high was it? How quick did it come down? You know, like how long did you actually have your eyes on it? You know, and I mean, it's probably 2 minutes straight that I had my eyes on it, you know, and let alone like actually seeing the craft itself for a good 30, 45 seconds, you know? And so there are just a lot of unexplainables. And it's really funny because I had a friend of mine ask me, well, very recently, like within the past year or two, like, well, why do you think they were here? And that was like, I have no fucking idea. I haven't even thought of that. I've been still trying to figure out like what the fuck I saw, not why they were here. You know? Yeah. But
and go, the no sound or no, there was no sort of propulsion mechanism that you could see anything shooting out the back like
nothing
a
out
typical
the back,
car.
No whistles, no airs, no heat, no glow, no wind, no nothing. This is a big ass box that was stuck in the sky.
One of the things that fascinates me about the conversation with David Fravor is the way he describes the movement of the Tic Tac UFO, how it was all herky jerky with no sense of acceleration. It wasn't speeding up to get to the spot. It was just kind of like appearing here and there. And from what I understand, and I'm no way an expert on propulsion other than my amateur, you know, rabbit hole dives on YouTube after these interviews, but like we don't have the technology as far as we know to be able to make those sort of maneuvers. We work on propulsion systems, which means you have to shoot shit out the back, like some sort of energy, and then that pushes us forward and that causes acceleration. To do something like that, it seems like we would have to have some sort of mechanism that alters space and time and essentially like creates its own orb
energy
of
field.
Gravity,
creates
or like
its own gravity field.
Energy field. Like you're not operating in a friction environment anymore. You're just like going from place to place, and you don't have to accelerate. You're essentially manipulating the gravity around the craft, and so you don't have to have a propulsion system. And so
these
that
things
aspect
don't
of it is
operate.
fascinating.
Yeah, these things don't operate under the rules of our current, like under the rules of physics as we know them currently, which is means that they're more than like one iteration or 2 iterations or steps down the road in terms of technology. You know, people might think back and be like, oh, well, we've got some government labs that, you know, definitely have some advanced tech. And of course we do. So does China, so does Russia, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Like, of course. And is that it may be far beyond what we even think is fathomable. And yet, you know, there are just quantum leaps in, you know, let alone like technology, but quantum leaps in our understanding of how the universe works would have to be made, like multiple of those steps to get to the point where anything like that technology that Favor saw, or, you know, my granddad experienced, or the shit that I saw that's stuck in the sky without any engine in it, you know, like, in my opinion, goes beyond what is possible in this frame of time. You know,
and the sound blows my mind too, because I'm trying to think of something that is huge and that can be suspended airborne without some sort of system hanging off it like a bridge that can be that silent. So there's something, some sort of engine, some sort of system.
I mean, dude, I was looking for legs. I was looking for legs. I was like, all right, cool. It's a cell tower. It just happens to be like right over the road. Like, that's weird. They put that up really quick, but there's like no,
like those guys, they messed up. The guys from Verizon just planted a cell tower in the middle of the road with invisible legs.
For sure. But like, I was looking for legs. I was like, all right, it's got to be something like that. But it's not. It was, I think that's the crazy part. Even if it was like off to the side of the road, I'd be like, all right, this had to be something. Maybe I couldn't see it with the trees, but dead ass over the middle of the road. So I mean, it was just so strange in so many ways. Yeah, and
were you guys on any drugs stronger than caffeine that could have been like any sort of hallucinogenics, mushrooms, LSD, anything that could be responsible for like a manipulation of reality to that extent?
Negative. And unless we're in like a simulation, this was a real fucking glitch in the Matrix. If we are in a simulation, no.
Could be the person running the simulation that day. Fucked up in the mountains of Virginia, that he was controlling that spot of the simulated projection. Just fucked up, and he'll be hearing from HR too.
Seriously.
Soon enough. I was digging around, and there are some UFO experiences that have been explained away by just weird and statistically highly improbable weather patterns. Was there anything transparent about it that could have been a weird ass cloud, or just like, it doesn't sound like a cloud at all, but just like anything about it that, looking back on it, you think maybe this was a weird weather pattern, or just like it looked like something was swirling, or lightning, or something, like storms in the area? You said the weather was pretty clear.
Totally clear day, not a cloud in the sky. I don't think there was a moon either. Once we both, Dan and I both could tell pretty instantaneously it was something weird, and not a normal thing, but I've gone through every possible explanation of what it could be, and there's nothing that even remotely like fits,
How many people have you told about this experience, and what was the communication like for you and Dan about this experience? Were you just like telling people when it happened? Did you both agree to, we're never fucking talking about this again? Like there's a lot of I think now the veil is kind of lifting on certain UFO experiences that are more credible, where, you're not seen as this fucking crazy person. But, back in 2012, that really wasn't the case, not nearly as much as it is today. So what did you guys kind of come to the conclusion on communication wise in the aftermath of that experience?
It's interesting because we'll still talk about it once or twice a year.
To each other.
Yeah. I've probably told less than 100 people. I would say, when we went back and we told our boss, I went back and told my dad and granddad, it's the first thing my dad said was, "Oh, did you check your butt?" With those jokes. Right. And I think we get some of that, but, ultimately I would say I get 90% buy-in, of like, oh shit, Dave saw something, just because of, I mean, it elicits a physiological response in me. Like I get like anxious even thinking about talking about it, and I got to check my breath, and like, like I've told the same story the same way however many times, and there's some semblance, as you were talking about, like rather stand up people. I have a that in my corner, of being like a regular dude that doesn't have a whole lot of, reason to skirt the truth, or, whatever it may be. And I happen to see some shit, and Dan's very much a similar way. He's a family man. He's a, director at Ernst, EY, and happened to see some shit,
Yeah. And we're both crazy in our own ways, but I want to make clear to people listening and watching that you are someone that I regularly come to for advice and insights on events that happen in my life and how to move forward, whether it's, something that's small, medium size, or a large decision that I'm going to make that's going to have a lot of impact in my life. So you are someone that I regularly will seek out for a sane and insightful and thoughtful perspective on the decisions that I'm making that are impacting the rest of my life. And we're going to get into Storywork and the work that you do helping other people as well. I just want to make that clear to people that if I'm making a big decision, you are hearing about it and you are going to have influence over the decision that I eventually decide to make. Like this isn't like, oh, I'm talking to my, crazy friend that's always just like having these weird experiences. Like most of the shit we talk about is, meditation, mindfulness, holistic health, relationships. Like this is 0.0001% of the conversation that we had.
I appreciate that, your words there. But you do make a very good point. You're right, where the majority of the stuff is like real life stuff. And then we happen to, have a conversation like this once in a blue moon. But I don't know, man. I mean, it's whether you, if you're listening to this, whether you believe me or not, right? There's very real things that are occurring today and that have occurred in recent past that have been both documented and remain unexplained. And I had a realization that just because something is, a UFO, right, doesn't mean it has to come from space. Maybe there's stuff from Earth here now where our oceans are 98% unexplored still, where a lot of times we may look outward and akin to many things, and a great analogy to life, maybe we need to look inward a little bit more towards, answers, right?
Yeah. That would be the place to hide a probe is in the ocean for sure on Earth.
No doubt.
We basically have mapped out almost all the land. There's still some spots unexplored, like fucking Amazon jungle. Who knows the fuck what's going on deep in there? But if you're gonna hide something on Earth, the ocean is a great spot to kind of put something for a long period of time and have humanity forget about it. So I don't doubt it.
No doubt.
Yeah, but people are going to understandably, like they'll make the connection between your father or your grandfather telling you about these experiences. You hear them as a kid, and anything you hear from an adult in general has some sort of influence on the way that you move and walk through the world, the way you experience things. That has an impact to the best of your ability, because everyone's biased. I'm biased. You have biases. Like you can't really just like unplug yourself from experiences you've had in the past. Like, do you think your grandfather's stories are informing the events that happened in any way beyond just this happened to my grandfather and this happened to me? Do you feel like was there anything about your grandfather's experiences that you were using during this experience to kind of like fill in the gaps? Did it feel like that in any way, or was it more just a separate experience?
Yeah.
And again, it's hard to detach yourself from that, but to the best of your ability.
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I remember, I think to answer it right off the bat, there wasn't anything to like detach from reality from, or like anything to like discern that, like it was pretty straight, clear and forward. Like, it was only 100, 200 feet in the sky. Like it was lit up enough to where it was pretty obvious, like what this was. There was no like not seeing it or anything like that. I do think I was more open to the idea of it being alien or non of, the US, like, or non of, Earth origins. I think if I hadn't have had those stories growing up, I might have talked myself into it being a balloon or some US craft or whatever it may be. But doing that research, hearing other people talk about it, knowing what I saw, corroborating what I saw with my buddy who also saw it. Yeah, I mean, it's not really explainable other than like, it's not made by dudes like you and me, or dudes even way smarter than you and me. It's not made by humans here, that we know of. I do also wonder if that connection to the past, whether there's some like lineage there or some like, because he saw it, now I can see it, or I don't know. Like that's a rabbit hole I've gone down, like why the fuck did I get to see that? Like why did I get to experience that? Was that random, or was that like, is there a reason why I'm supposed to be open-minded or now like know that there's, something else out there? So I
Could be
all those things.
There's something else I wanted to get into, which is that you've been very open about your use of psychedelics and other medicines like combo, and we've even discussed it on the podcast. And so just by the nature of having that sort of information out there, and you also have information on your own website, and you lead sessions where you help people heal through psychedelics, there's going to be a certain percentage of people listening to this conversation and UFO conversations in general that use the use of drugs or psychedelics as a way to discredit anything in this realm. So people will hear, oh, this guy has done, mushrooms, or this guy, he burns himself and he puts frog poison on his skin, and like it sounds wild. And if you don't know about it, like understandably, you're going to have some questions. But I would ask people that are listening and watching this podcast to have a separation between the lifestyle that someone chooses to live and the things that they observe that may or may not be part of that lifestyle. And you said that you guys were not on any sort of psychedelic substances or drugs at the same time. Like you can be someone who experiments with drugs. You can be someone who experiments with hallucinogens and also have super fucking vivid experiences like this that are not because of the influence of those drugs. I don't, and the psychedelic community is becoming more open now. People are more willing to talk about their use of psychedelics. I guess the point that I'm trying to make in a roundabout way is that there will be people who write you off because of past use of drugs. And I would ask you, if you feel yourself leaning that direction, and just as a listener of this podcast in general, to not give Dave the benefit of the doubt, to use your own evidence, use your own eyes. You're allowed to think whatever you want to think. You don't have to give a stranger the benefit of a doubt just because, I'm telling you to listen to this person or having this person on a podcast, but to have in mind that two things can be true at once. Someone can experiment with psychedelics and someone can have very real experiences that seem like they're not of this world, that aren't stemming from their use of psychedelics. Yeah. And I would argue that the use of psychedelics may make you better able to discern certain experiences as psychedelic or non-psychedelic, because you have the information and the experiences built up to say, okay, this feels like a trip. This feels like something I've experienced before. This feels like something, I'm entering another reality through the use of a substance versus this is not a substance that I've been on. This is not a substance. Like, this does not feel like a psychedelic experience. Right. So I would ask people to make that distinction in their mind that are listening to this, and to keep that in mind as you're listening to this conversation, other conversations like it, that past drug use, whatever it is, doesn't, discredit you from having very real, credible experiences.
Yeah. I mean, you can look around now, look outside, look in your flower bed or whatever, and see some amazing shit happen in your garden, and, not be fucked up and realize, holy shit, that's incredible. And I think it's important, in full candor, to my first psilocybin experience was after college. It was April of 2011. This occurred, almost a year later. So totally, obviously unconnected. And combo use started in 2017, and psilocybin use since then started in like 2018 or 19. Right. So I had, drug use years later has no bearing on things seen and unseen, however many years ago, I've yet to have visuals really with psychedelics. Like, it's not like you take acid or psilocybin and see a bunch of little leprechauns running around, at least for me. Right. And what I have experienced is an openness to other potential realities. frankly, and being open to other potential worlds that we either discern or don't discern on a regular basis. So yeah, great point and interesting to note.
Yeah. And just because I haven't had as many psychedelic experiences to the strength that Dave has had doesn't mean I'm any more credible. I could be the biggest bullshitter of all time, and it has nothing to do with drug use. It's cultivating a sense of truth and being willing to listen to evidence and look at what people are saying and kind of build up in your own mind and body some sort of sense of whether someone seems credible or doesn't. And again, Dave is one of those guys that has given me no reason to, question his credibility.
Thank you, sir.
I in these last 10 to 15 minutes, I wanted to tie the UFO experience into Storywork. And so before we get into Storywork, could you give people your definition of what Storywork is and what you do as a story worker, and then we'll kind of connect it to maybe some things that are relevant about the whole experience in the past.
Cool. So Storywork is the process of understanding how your language and your breath affects your reality through the stories you create and tell yourselves, right? Ultimately, what we do is we sit across from one another on a Zoom call and we look at a Google Doc together, and I help you work through your thoughts and work through past experiences and help change your relationship to those past experiences by changing your physiological state now. So it's focused journaling, it's focused breathing, it's kind of a talk therapy or cognitive therapy, though it is not technically therapy. It has roots in NLP and some TMS, and it is incredibly effective for clearing space and helping one get creative moving forward, which I believe only comes from having space. So
have you thought about your experience in relation to Storywork? Because you learned the skill of story work and helping other people work their stories, and myself included, years after this experience. Have you used Storywork in any way to analyze what happened? Have you thought about it in terms of a Storywork framework? Is there anything interesting, any connection you made between Storywork and this experience in any way?
So for me, I use Storywork either to get clear on a decision or what if question, or I use Storywork to move through an emotional charge of some sort. And to be honest, I've, over time been able to move through emotional charges that come from telling this particular story for the most part. I did say I do get a little bit anxious at the start of it, and that is something that I've now noticed. I can take my breath or two. Okay. And tell the story, right? I think in the beginning, having those tools to be able to, had I known about Storywork 10 years ago, or 9 years ago when this happened, I would have potentially used that right out the gate to okay, let's fucking slow down, breathe through what you actually saw and process it a little bit smoother, quicker, faster, efficiently. And I didn't have that, and just ended up telling the story over and over and over again to a select, couple group of people, and here we are.
It's fascinating to think about the ways that you could apply Storywork to an experience like that, even if you didn't have the skills at the time, because I'm thinking about the work that you've done with me in particular and rephrasing certain ways you say things in your mind, the language, saying things out loud, writing, everything that comes with reframing the stories we tell ourselves to our own benefit, to living a more fulfilling life. And your profession is helping people reframe the story of their life and build the stories in a way that help them live in a more fulfilling way. And this is a story of an experience that happened. It is something that happened. And as technology improves and as we gather more evidence, I suspect we'll have a much clearer view and a more accurate view and be able to describe these things in greater detail as we figure out more things in society. But it's this is a story of an experience that like Dan said, everything is different now. I forget. Is that what he said? He said, this changes things.
Yeah, this changes everything.
This changes everything. And yeah, it's crazy to think about it in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, for Dan, he's gotten much less religious since. Like it really shook him foundationally from like he had Catholicism and kind of grew up in that world, and it changed things for him with that. I think for me, it changed my perception of what's possible for sure. It definitely changed my worldview that like, wow, maybe I'm not like the shit, and maybe humans aren't like the top of the fucking food chain, and maybe like USA isn't number one best ever, right? Like I think it really did shift some perspective and make me think more globally early on. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think about that whenever my mind goes to, if another civilization, if group aliens from wherever they are, and like I'm saying aliens super generally, I don't know what the fuck they're gonna look like, or
right.
if they're even be able to exist in this atmosphere or communicate with us. But if there was an alien civilization that tomorrow made it apparent and obvious that they exist and they're making contact with Earth, and there was a meeting with the leaders around the world of how we're going to handle this and making contact with other civilizations, I can't help but feel like a combination of, excitedness, also scariness, and then also a large sense of relief of like, whew, like there's so much other shit out there. The problems that I build up in my head, the stresses on a day to day, there's this is just one civilization. Like, who the fuck knows how many other people are out there? And I can't help but feel like it would just, obviously it would throw the planet into a frenzy. But I think in the long term, it would also kind of give us a perspective shift of like, we're not just one person of humanity. We're one person of humanity, of civilizations, like who the fuck knows how much shit is out there. And so I think like the first contact, whenever that is officially, like when they choose to make themselves known, I don't know if they'll do like a YouTube announcement. They'll start a YouTube channel, dude, like, hey, what's up, guys?
Send it out on the, on the phone.
You'll get a push notification, dude.
This is Ragnar from Galata Galaxy, and
100%. Yeah, it'll be like one of those secret podcasts that Joe Rogan does, where he'll just drop a podcast with Snowden. It'll be like the podcast with a fucking alien. He's just like, they're here, guys.
It'll be a U2, like the U2 album. It'll be a musical, directly updated to your phone. No, I do think you brought up an interesting point about changing your perspective and putting things into perspective, because when I think of the grandeur of it all, it honestly goes back to miracles do not happen in opposition to nature. They happen in opposition to what we know about nature. And to me, that thought process, as long as it's not hey, we're coming to extinct you guys, and then it's all right, fuck, it's most likely if contact is made, when contact is made, there's going to be a purpose for that, and it is going to put things into perspective. Like, wow, like I have my life, that's incredible. Like there are family nearby, like that's really incredible. Like we have food, that's great, and we are a part of something bigger, and there is something else out there other than us. Dude, 500 years ago, right? The whole fucking universe revolved around the Earth, and Galileo was exiled and excommunicated for having the correct view that, wow, actually, no, we're not the center of the whole fucking universe, right? Like, there's some other shit out there, and we actually go around the sun, not vice versa. So things can change in a very short period of time. Like, that's not a long time ago. So there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot we're still going to learn, and it's exciting to know that those opportunities are out there and could be coming. Yeah,
and look where we are now. We've had multiple technological revolutions with industry within the past 120 years. We've had most recently the internet, and being able to work with people across the entire planet on technology and chips and collecting data in amounts that, you know, we never could have imagined 50 years ago or even 10 years ago. Like the amount of shit that we can keep on a square centimeter is mind blowing, and it's only accelerating quicker. So who the fuck knows where we're going to be, you know, 100 years from now, or even 20, 30 years from now.
It's awesome to think about. It really is.
So do you have a quote? I pulled out a quote from James Clear. You did say the miracle quote, which was an absolute bomb.
Yeah,
so
that's a gem. I'll say that again. I don't want it to be my official quote, but I will say that again.
I won't log it as official.
Okay. Miracles do not happen in opposition to nature. Miracles merely happen in opposition to what we know about nature. That's by St. Augustine.
Goddamn.
Boom. Right. So this quote actually comes from a friend of mine. Grew up with this guy, Philip Larry Loving, and he grew up in the neighborhood down the road, and he was a very good friend of my friend group. Got diagnosed with a brain tumor just out of college and fought valiantly for about 10 years. Passed away last year, right? But we had a memorial for him recently, and that's actually what my little recent camping trip with the buddies was all about, was kind of honoring Phil and remembering him, and literally the funniest fucker anyone has ever met. But he had a way about him of making him, like, he made you feel connected in the conversation and made everyone he talked to feel important, right? So he had a quote that was in our yearbook. So this is from an 18-year-old Phil, said the following: "A leader is not just someone that commands or is in charge. A leader is someone that can make the world a better place, can cheer a person up, and make everyone realize that they're important." So I heard that, saw that at his memorial, and it really made me think about what the role of a good leader is and a good manager is. And like, there's different types of that. And I know in the past I've, maybe found myself not feeling like a leader because I wasn't like rah rah, or because I didn't maybe have the influence, or, whatever it is. And yet I have always noticed myself connecting to people, and trying to build people up, or noticing if someone's down or whatever it may be. And Phil just had that quality to the nth degree. So, I really love that quote for reminding people that we can make a difference in our own ways. And even if it's just making someone laugh, or, pulling someone in for a hug, or, like whatever it may be, right? Like that can be impactful and valuable to someone's life. And I encourage you to keep doing that.
Yeah. And I would say that you have that effect on me as well. You definitely elevate my energy. I just fucking sat up. I was like slouching down and started to think about it. I'm like, woo, let's go, baby.
Hell yeah, bro. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a hell of a quote. And it's a good point that leadership isn't, and I would argue rarely is the rah-rah shit. If you're looking for it, that's definitely necessary. But a lot of leadership is the way that you inspire and make other people feel, and kind of shine a light on their own capabilities to handle shit. So this is a quote from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. And he tweeted this yesterday, actually. And I was in a mood where I'm in a transitional period right now where I am putting some content, creating some podcast content, and putting it behind a paywall. So like for subscribers and stuff like that. And there's like all this shit that comes with it that doesn't feel like I'm moving the ball forward. And even just like the day-to-day editing and stuff like that, like it's just hard work. There's no way around podcast editing until you have, $60,000 a year to pay a producer. Like part of being a podcaster is just like 5% of the time you're going to be recording a podcast, and then all the rest of the time you're just going to be chopping shit up, getting it out, putting it on social media, reaching out to people and keeping it going. And so I was in this zone of like wanting to figure out a way of how to become good at podcasting and build up a subscriber base more without doing hard work. And I was like brainstorm. I was like, how can I do this easy? Like, how can I not work hard and get the fruits of working hard? And I was just like kind of in that mood for a couple of days, and I was like, fuck, like and after I read this quote, it helped me really lean into the hard work aspect of it. And this is from James Clear. He said, "Strangely, life gets hard when you try to make it easy. Exercising is hard, but not exercising makes life harder. Uncomfortable conversations are hard, but avoiding every conflict is harder. Mastering your craft is hard, but having no skills is harder. Easy has a cost. And I wrote the last part of that quote down on one of my 7 whiteboards because I'm a fucking addict. And I put underneath it, cost of easy is greater than the cost of hard work, just as like a summary of that quote. And it made me realize, like, I've felt this way before, but this quote, it was like it popped up on my Twitter feed right as I needed it. And I felt, I need to accept that I chose podcasting if this is something I want to do and will make a living off of, and that comes with hard work, and I'm choosing to do that, and my life will be more fulfilling and more fun if I lean into the hard work and just accept that I need to do it and have fun with it. And some parts will suck, a lot of it will be fun, and a lot of some are just going to be like neutral experiences, and that's part of any fucking job that you want to do. It's always good to brainstorm easier ways to get a better product or try to maximize your time for the same or better product. But there's no fulfilling career path where you're going to wake up and be like, damn, like this is the easiest shit I've ever done. Like just a following appeared out of nowhere and now I'm making all this money. And, it's a very long process and you know that as well with Work Your Stories and changing career paths in your 20s and building up social media and clients in the holistic space and the Storywork space. And that quote was the kick in the ass that I needed. And,
hell yeah.
Applying it to aliens, I don't, I'm trying to think of a way to apply hard work to aliens. If you're listening to this, if you're not of this earth and you're listening to this, when you're dealing with humans, recognize that it's going to be hard work. It's not going to be an easy relationship, but if you make the effort to cultivate a meaningful relationship with humans over the long term, you will be rewarded for it, and your civilization will be better where, we can be fucking dumb as fuck sometimes, but we also do some beautiful, crazy, great things. So don't blow us up.
Aho to that. And if you aren't an alien and you're listening to this, a takeaway you can have is it took a lot of hard work for those aliens to get here, to get the technology,
yes,
to get to this point. And if they can do that crazy shit, you can do whatever the hell you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So
where's the best place for people to check out your work and follow you?
So I actually did something different on the last podcast I was on, and I've already gotten some responses, so I really like it. I'm going to give you guys my email. All right, just shoot me an email, no subject line, give me a subject line, do whatever it is. It's going to be super simple. It's workyourstories@gmail.com. If you want to chat on this or whatever, hit me up. You can go to workyourstories.com if you'd like to learn more about that. And I am on the gram at Get Strapped, Stay Strapped. But shoot me an email and I'll respond.
Workyourstories@gmail.com.
You got it.
And that will be in the podcast description as well as the other places you can find Dave. And that reminds me, we need to schedule another Storywork call as well, because it's been a while, and we definitely have some shit. I'm never going to be in a place where things are stagnant, so we definitely need to hop on another call and get shit going. And thank you guys for listening to this. Thank you for taking this journey with us, the UFO spiritual, hardworking, white God lightning journey. Thank you guys for sticking with us, and I'll talk to you guys soon.